We have a Bible, we have a Bible study without a teacher. So we'll vote and see who wants to teach this morning. Oh, look at. Oh, my gosh.
It's only 6:59.
I'm early, bro.
Huh?
I'm early.
Are we blessed, huh?
I'm early.
All right.
Okay, last week. I asked, in the beginning, I asked a couple of questions. If anybody knew where Doc was and anybody knew where Howard was. Well, Howard showed up. But, his wife is in the hospital, so, I'd like you guys to remember her in prayer today. Doc is in Sedona. He's doing pretty good. So I talked to him, but he'll be here, probably next week. So let me open in prayer, and then I got a little thing to announcement to say. Father, we come to you again today and just are so blessed to be able to study your word, and we're so blessed to have Lucas and to just take your word, dissect it, and Lord, it just means so much to us as he teaches it to us. We're so fortunate to have it. And just open our hearts, Lord, and our lives to live our life according to his teaching and your word. And Father, I just ask these things in your name. Amen. I don't know, I think every morning I just get something in my throat. But on the table, you all have a copy of this. And what this is I thought last week Lucas did so good that I took his summary of John and we typed it up. I gotta be honest, I had my secretary type it up. And there is a couple of typos in here that Doug found, but I didn't have a chance to correct them. But how many of you this last week, because of his teaching, did we say something? How many of you last week, because of Lucas's teaching, opened the book of John? Raise your hand.
It would have to be because of his teaching.
You don't qualify. You know, I'm gonna ask that question again when he comes back, because I think that's pretty impressive, and that's gotta make him feel really good. So I think that, I think the way he describes it and goes through it, I could read that book. I have read that book many, many times, but, I get so much more out of it when he explains it. But as you look at this, as you go through this outline, I think it'll all come back to you on what we did last week, and it goes through the whole book, or all the chapters that he mentioned last week, and just gives a summary of those chapters. I think it's really great. So take this home and study it, and each week we can hold him accountable now to do what he told us he's going to do. Okay, I want to ask this question one more time, because you got to see this.
Okay.
How many of you went home or during this last week, opened the book of John and studied John because of his teaching the previous week?
Oh, wow.
Look at that. Cool. Pretty good, huh? Pretty good. You're having an impact.
You didn't raise your hand. And you're probably the person that needs it the
I
most.
am, yeah. You got that right. But I don't want you to let this go to your head.
Oh, thanks, man. I'll do my best. Am I good? Are we good to go?
You're good to go.
You might want to fall you back on this mic here. Because it'll, yeah. Give me 2 seconds, okay?
You got the action of these if anybody wants to take something for somebody that wasn't here. And I think you can just copy for them.
I'm sure what buttons are done and undone. Is that better there? Maybe a little less? Maybe a little less? Anybody seen Spinal Tap? Let everybody see the movie Spinal Tap?
Yeah, years ago.
One person, great, perfect. It's going great already.
Evidently too.
Yeah, two, awesome. Okay, cool, so, thanks, Dave, for typing this up, that's awesome, it's a good reminder of the three words, that we're gonna kind of focus on this year, and I'll just reiterate them, that we're gonna be biblical. If you are brand new to Marketplace, we study a book of the Bible, we're in the book of John, we're in chapter 4, if you wanna get there, but we're gonna be biblical, not so the Bible is ultimately the object of our worship, but so that it opens a door to the object of our worship, which is Christ himself, it's fascinating that we would even be there based on the passage we're gonna look at today. We're gonna see something else that should not be the object of our worship as well, but that should ultimately point us to the object of our worship. Second is we're gonna be transformational. We're not gonna be like a man who looks at himself in the mirror and goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like, as James would say. He says, don't merely listen to the word, but do what it says. So we're gonna do that. Number three, we're gonna be invitational. Anybody have an opportunity to invite somebody to Marketplace this week? Cool, I did. They didn't accept, but that's all right. I did, and that's fine. Our job is just to be the, just sow seed. That's it, just sow seed. And invite somebody here. So I hope that you have an opportunity to do that. What we did last week is we did a little bit of review and a summary of the book of John. But if you recall where we ended last spring, the place where we ended was in John chapter 4, when Jesus has this conversation with a woman at a well. We're 4 chapters into the book of John. We're going to get to the end of chapter 4 today. 4 chapters into the book of John, and Jesus has only done one miracle. That's one of the other things we talked about it a little bit last week. What sticks out to you in the book of John? John is far more interested in the conversations Jesus has with people than he is the miracles Jesus does. Isn't that interesting? Like John chapter 13 through 17, it's just this extended conversation he has with his disciples. And it's not, like the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew where Jesus is just telling people stuff. It's these conversations that he has. It's so funny that as we get older, we become far more interested in who people are than what they can do. I'm going to say that again. As we get older, we become far more interested in who people are than what it is that they can do. Remember, John is probably in his 80s at this point, Dave. And he has now, he's advanced in age, right? And so he's looking back. And it's interesting, it's fascinating to me the ways in which he reflects on, he's far less interested in the tricks, the miracles Jesus did. It's even very, very salient and important to this passage that we're going to look at today. He's far more interested in the things that Jesus did. He's far more interested in what he could do. So I'll give you an example. I was like 19, 20 years old. We were at a camp at Azusa Pacific University, and there was a guy out on the track at Azusa Pacific University doing some training on the track. And me and a couple of buddies recognized that this individual is Mike Powell. Anybody know who Mike Powell is? World record holder in long jump for a little bit, gold medalist in long jump, right? He's out on the track training. So we went on the track to watch this guy jumps the length of a school bus, right? I'm like, cool. Right? So we went out and we're watching Mike Powell on the track, and he's training with his trainer there. And all they were working on that day was timing. So Mike Powell would just take 3 hard steps and then put his foot on the thing they did jump off of. And then he would get 5 steps back and he would do that. And then he would do his approach, and over and over and over again. I mean, dozens and dozens of times working on timing. That's all he was there to do. But he knew why we were there. We're 19-year-old kids, right? Just punks. And he goes, you guys want to see me jump one time? Not arrogance, but it's a gift to us. So he jumped one time. And these guys, they hit that marker and they just keep running, like this. Like, I don't think he's come down yet. It was unbelievable. I was so just captivated by what this man could do. But it's been 25 years now. I'm far less captivated by what it is I saw him do. And I'm far more captivated by the type of character that he revealed in him, that he would give us that gift, even though that's not what he was there to do that day. Are you tracking with me? So John, now in his 80s, is looking back at Jesus, And he's talking about this conversation that he has with the woman at a well. Listen to all the gaps that Jesus bridges. He bridges an ethnic gap. He was a Jew, she was a Samaritan. He bridges a cultural gap. They lived in far different cultures. He bridges a moral gap. You've had 5 husbands, and the man you're living with now is not your husband. He bridges a religious gap. The Samaritans believed in the Torah, and that was it, and nothing else. They established their own capital in Samaria, rejected the covenant, rejected Jerusalem. He bridges a gender gap. Men was not supposed to talk to women. He bridges an life experience gap. He bridges a security gap. She was insecure, so insecure that she came to the well at noon while no one else would be there. And Jesus knew that he was the Father's beloved Son in whom he was well pleased. He bridges a perception gap. They saw the world very differently. And John is so fascinated by not what Jesus did, but who he was. It's the longest conversation recorded in all 4 gospels, this conversation with the woman at the well. And Jesus, remember, does not begin by condescending to meet her need. That's not where he starts. He condescends and asks her to meet his need. Will you give me a drink? He says. This is so incredible that we see the incarnate Word of God humbling himself enough not to go around Samaria, which most Jews would do, but go through Samaria and bridge all of those gaps just so that this woman could be fully seen and fully known. Gets to a point where he says, look, you've had 5 husbands, and the one you have now is not your husband. And she goes, she tries to redirect the conversation again. She's like, hey, listen, I know that Messiah is coming. The Samaritans had a different word for Messiah. It meant reformer or restorer was what they called Messiah. They had a concept of Messiah, but she says, I know that he is coming. And Jesus says, I who speak to you am he. So that's where we landed last year. What we did not get to was the response and reaction of the folks in her town. We're going to do that today, and the healing of the nobleman's son. If you are studying in the book of John, just a couple things I would encourage you to take a look at. Take a look at the ways in which John is using water. Remember, we're 4 chapters in. Jesus has changed water into wine. He's told Nicodemus, you not just have to be born of water, but of the what? Spirit, right? And he's asked for a drink at the well, and then when the woman leaves, she just drops her bucket and runs. John uses water. Jesus washes feet with water. Jesus is stabbed in the side, blood and water flow. If you're looking to do something, a word study in the book of John, I would encourage you to do that study. It's fascinating. So anyway, that's the conversation he has. Let's look at the response of the people in her town. So we're in John chapter 4, verses 39 through 41 is where we'll start. And this is really interesting. So the woman comes back and says, come see a man well, here you go. Verse 39. Many Samaritans from that town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. He told me all that I ever did. Listen, did Jesus actually do that? Of course he didn't. Of course he didn't. I think that this woman felt this way because someone for the very first time knew her completely. Does that make sense? That Jesus said to her, listen, I know you. I know the real you. You can't hide from me. And that sense of being totally exposed, but totally exposed and totally loved at the same time, compelled her to give this testimony, which isn't totally accurate, but it does reflect how she felt about that conversation. Okay? Verse 40. So when the Samaritans came to him, they asked him to stay with them, and he stayed there 2 days. Great. And many more believed because of his word. Remember, this is John's ultimate purpose, right? That people would believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and by believing have life in his name. That word believing is not mental assent, that I agree with these kind of statements of fact, propositional truths. Rather, it's a placing of one's faith in Jesus and setting the weight of one's entire life down. And many other believe because of his word. Listen to this. I think this is so incredibly cool. Let's not pass over this verse. Verse 42. They said to the woman, it's no longer because of what you said that we believe, we've heard for ourselves. For we know that this is indeed the Savior of the world. Love. After 2 days, he departed for Galilee. For Jesus himself had testified that a prophet has no honor in his hometown. So when he came to Galilee, the Galileans welcomed him, having seen all that he had done in Jerusalem at the feast, for they too had gone to the feast. We have to stop right there and deal with the difficulty in the text. Jesus says, Jesus is headed toward his, that word, hometown is in the original Greek, patris, and it could mean hometown or homeland. Okay, so his hometown, of course, is Nazareth. John repeats that over and over. He's not headed to Nazareth, but he's headed back to Galilee, which is a Jewish area. So he's headed out of the Samaritan area to a Jewish area. In a sense, he's headed to his patris, his homeland. Tracking? Everybody tracking with me? Okay. And Jesus himself had testified that a prophet has no what? Say it. Honor in his hometown. But then the next verse says that he shows up and many of the Galileans did what? Look at the verse. Welcomed him. Does that feel like it's contradictory? Does it feel like it's contradictory? Okay. So what John is doing here, we're going to find out here in a minute, is that, and if you're jotting down notes, jot this down. The Galileans welcomed the magician, not the Messiah. This welcoming is not an authentic welcoming. It's not a genuine welcoming. They're welcoming the magician, not the Messiah. They're welcoming Jesus for what he can do and not for who he is. They are not like John. They're impressed that he can jump that far, but they're not moved by his character and his identity as the sent one from God. Are you with me? Are you tracking? So, yes, he doesn't have honor in his hometown. They welcomed him because they saw all he did at the feast in Jerusalem. Just so we know, the only thing that John records that Jesus did at the feast in Jerusalem is clear the temple out. That's the only thing he records. Here's my hunch, that Jesus did more than that at the feast in Jerusalem that John just didn't recall, or not didn't recall, but didn't record. Okay, I think that Jesus did some other stuff, and the Galileans were at that Passover feast as well, and they saw Jesus do that. They had heard of what he had done in Cana, which is also in Galilee, right? And changing water into wine. So when this trickster shows up, this miracle worker, they welcome him for what he can do and not who he is. Listen closely. This is where we're headed this morning in terms of the main one. Is not welcoming Jesus into one's life for what he can do, but for who he is. Okay, everybody nod, we'll keep going. Good, okay, let's keep going. So here's what happens. Verse 46, so he came again to Cana in Galilee, where he had made water wine, and at Capernaum, there was an official whose son was ill. That word official in the original language is basilikos. This is an individual who's working for Herod Antipas. Herod Antipas was not really a king, but he'd given himself the title of king. He's the one who had John the Baptist assassinated, and eventually he's the one that turned Jesus back over to Pontius Pilate. Pontius Pilate kind of washes the hands of Jesus, and Jesus eventually goes to the cross. This is not a nice man that this basilikos works for. But for some reason, he knows that Jesus can do something about his sick kid, which I think is fascinating. Verse 47. When this man heard that Jesus had come from Judea to Galilee, he went to him and asked him to come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. So Jesus said, unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe. Okay, we're going to come back to that in a minute. The official said to him, sir, come down before my child dies. Jesus said, go, and your son will live. The man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him and went on his way. Stop there. I think it's fascinating. I think there's a couple things here that are really interesting. One is that the contrast between the invitation of this basilikos, this official, saying, come down to heal my son, and Jesus saying, go, your son will live. That contrast there of those two things. So this man takes Jesus at his word and goes back to his son without begging Jesus to come with him. How do we feel so far about this basilikos? Do we like this guy? I mean, I think he's okay. Like, he goes to the right person, and instead of begging Jesus to come with him, when Jesus says, go and your son will live, he takes him at his word. And this is back to do the word, not just listen to it, but do it. Jesus says, go and your son will live. And he goes, okay, this is me. I'm in the shoes. That doesn't feel great to me. I'd like you to come with me now, please, right? Like, you're the guy I've come to for help, and you're telling me just go and my son will live. But he takes him at his word, and he takes a step of faith. I think that's pretty cool, right? Keep going. As he was going down, his servants met him and told him his son was recovering. That's verse 51. So he asked them the hour when he began to get better, and they said, yesterday at the 7th hour, the fever left him. Father knew that was when the hour Jesus said to him, your son will live. And he himself did what? Say that word. Believed. And all his household. This was now the second sign that Jesus did when he had come from Judea to Galilee. Two things. One, Jesus said to him, unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe. Here's what I think. Okay? I think that Jesus is saying this to this man, but I think he's saying it real loudly for everybody else to hear. Because he's been welcomed by this group so that he can perform tricks for them. Okay? He's been welcomed by this group because they've heard of the things that he can do. Now, what we have is this Basilicos, who's a Gentile working for Herod Antipas, which is kind of a enemy of the Jewish people. And he comes to Jesus and like, look, if your kid was sick, just like mine, I'd cry out in desperation too. Comes to the right guy, cries out in desperation, and takes a step of faith. And when it actually happens in the way Jesus said it was going to happen, this man, he and his whole household put their faith in who Jesus is, not just what he can do. Tracking? Very cool. What I think that Jesus is doing here when he says, unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe, is he's saying to the folks who have dishonored him in his hometown, who have just come to him as a magician, that like, look, like there's, like, I can't, I can do as many signs and wonders as you want me to do, but ultimately it's you placing your faith in who I am, not just what I can do. Here's how I know that. Because John, at the end of this text, says, listen, this was now the second sign that Jesus did when he had come from Judea to Galilee. We talked about this before, but a sign is not a thing in and of itself. What's the point of a sign? It's to point you to the ultimate destination, right? Like, we've given this example before, some of you probably remember it, and that's fine. We'll just do it again. But the welcome to Disneyland sign. Can you picture that sign in your head, the welcome to Disneyland, right? Could you imagine if I drove my 9 and 5-year-old, we're going to Disneyland, and we get to that sign, like, this is it. Like, well, Dad, we gotta, no, this is it. This is the sign, look, this is the sign. Like, no, the sign is here to point you to the ultimate destination. So when John says this is the second sign that Jesus did, the sign is pointing us to the ultimate destination. So the sign, track with me now, the sign is what Jesus did. And ultimately, it points us to who he is. I'll say that again. The sign is what Jesus did. And ultimately, the sign points us to who he is. So what is it that Jesus did? Well, he healed an official's son. This boy was at the point of death almost. Jesus says, go and your son will live. Miraculously, the minute that Jesus said that, he began to recover. The man ended up finding that out the next day when his servants came to meet him on the road. And that sign, what Jesus did, pointed that individual to who Jesus is. Is everybody tracking? I'm like saying this over and over and over. Is everybody tracking with me? Okay, here's why this is so critically important. Again, if you're jotting down notes, this is one thing. We don't worship God for what he's done. We worship him for who he is. I'm gonna say that again. We don't worship God for what he's done. We may thank God for what he's done. But we worship him for who he is. Say that a couple different ways. People, places, things, whatever, are not worthy of worship for what they've done. They're worthy of worship for who they are. And ultimately, God is the only one worthy of worship. If he's not worthy of worship for what he's done, he's worthy of worship for who he is and his character. And this is what we're gonna unpack for the rest of the time. So I'll give you an example. I had a dog, we just put her down in January. She was a Weimaraner. Her name was Misha. Weimaraners typically live 10 to 12 years. She gave me 16. I still miss her every day. She was the best dog. She was so docile and so good with my kids. I once saw Misha get bit by another dog. Another dog got angry, like, oh, they're on leash or whatever. They got angry. Misha got bit and she sat down. I'm like, you're not going to do anything back to the, this is like how sweet my dog was. Okay. One time we're living in Canada in a place called Uxbridge. I left the house for 15 minutes. I came back. I even have a picture on my phone. Let's see. I came back. Let's see, anxiety. What's up?
God spelled backward is dog.
God spelled backward is dog. That's funny. Yeah, I don't have a picture anymore. I'll find it. Okay. So I left the house for 15 minutes. Misha was maybe 13 at the time, something like that. So I come back to my house after being gone 15 minutes, come in the side door and come around the corner, and we have one of those refrigerators that opens like this on the top and then a pull drawer freezer at the bottom. Okay. I come in and my freezer's open. Wide open. I'm like, well, I don't think I left my freezer open when I left the house 15 minutes ago. Then I come around this corner and my 13-year-old dog is laying on the carpet in my house and it's just polished off an entire tin of Ben & Jerry's. Now, here's the deal. It was not torn up, right? Like it was meticulously unwrapped and enjoyed. Like I half expected to find a bowl and a spoon there too, right? Because so I go over to the freezer. There are teeth marks in the freezer. She had seen people do this. So she figured if I bite it and pull, there's gonna be something good in there. And she was right. She was right. Eating full on Ben & Jerry's in my house. She was the best. Let's say this never happened, but let's say hypothetically speaking, my house caught on fire. And while my family was sleeping, my amazing, sweet, intelligent dog, Misha, pulled everyone out by their pajamas with her mouth, pulled us onto the lawn, right? One at a time, and saved my entire family's life. I might buy her a special bed. I might feed her steak and Ben & Jerry's for the rest of her life. I might do all kinds of things for her. What I would not do is worship her. Because you don't worship things for what they've done. You worship them for who they are. Are you tracking? I would not sing. How great is my dog? Sing with me, how great is my dog, and all see how great is my dog. Right? It's ridiculous and uncomfortable because I'm singing, right? But it's also ridiculous and uncomfortable because it's ridiculous. It's dumb. Because the very thing that she did does not change who she is. She's still a dog. She's not worthy of worship because of some extraordinary and miraculous thing that she's done. She could do many extraordinary and miraculous things that would not make her more worthy of worship. So what John is doing here is he's saying, This is the second sign that Jesus did. And ultimately, I don't want you to park at the sign. I want the sign to point you to the destination. That's who he is. Everybody's tracking with me? I don't want it to point you ultimately, or I don't want you to park at the sign. I want it to point you to who he is. So here's the question, and we're going to do some discussion this morning. We don't do this all that often. But here's what happens. Jesus heals an official's son without showing up, right? Boy's on the verge of death, and just by a word, he's restored to life. And that sign that Jesus performs points this official ultimately to the character of God, more specifically to the character of the incarnate Logos, that is Jesus. So let me ask this question. We're going to turn around the tables for discussion. If what he does points to who he is, who does this what point to? Can I say that again? If the point that John is making is this sign that Jesus performs ultimately points us to his character, to who he is, why is John recording this specific sign? What does that point to in terms of the character of Jesus, ultimately, in terms of who he is? So let me give you a clue as to one of what these answers might be. In Romans chapter 1, Paul would write that creation itself puts on display what? God's power and creativity. So the what that he did was create, but the who that it points to is a powerful and creative God. Tracking with me? Everybody tracking with me? The what that he did was create all that we can see and all that we can't see. And the who that it points to is who God is as a powerful, all-powerful, omnipotent, is a $2 theological word, and creative God. So in this particular case, Jesus heals an official son without even showing up in the location. And it points to the character of God. And so what is it that this sign is pointing us to in terms of who Jesus is? Does everyone understand the question? Anybody not understand the question?
Yeah, I don't understand it.
You don't? Okay.
Yeah, after class.
Yeah. Anybody else just not understand the question?
You're referring to in this verse, what is it pointing to?
In this particular context, Jesus heals an official's son.
Right.
Okay. So what is it about his character that John wants us to know? Why does he record this? Because here's what we don't want to be. We don't want to be the people that are interested in Jesus for the tricks that he can do. I come to Jesus because I think it will help my business get better. I come to Jesus because it help my marriage get better. I come to Jesus because he might be able to cure my anxiety. All those things are true, but ultimately those things that he does point to who he is, his identity. And so in this particular case, what does this miracle point to in terms of Jesus' identity, in terms of his character?
Why? You're talking about the why.
Correct. Talking about the why.
Well, the why is at near the end of the book, in John 20:30. It says, now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. That's the why of all of this. So him writing any of these signs and miracles.
Correct.
That is the reason. I mean, we can try to dissect these, but that is the
Okay, so correct. And there are specific things about Jesus being the Christ, specific attributes of his Christhood, his Christological nature that this particular miracle points to. So I would love it if you turn around your tables and have that discussion. What is the why? What part of God's identity, Jesus' identity, does this point to? And we're going to start asking ourselves 3 questions every time we gather at the end of our time together. Those things are, what does this teach you about God? What does it teach you about yourself? And what does God want you to change about what you think, feel, or do? Remember? This is what does this teach you about God? Not just that Jesus does a trick, but why does he do the trick? What does this point to about his character? You can turn around your table to discuss that, and we'll come back. Okay, stop real quick, turn and look at me. See, Dave understands the question now. So I just want to give you an example. No, but you get there eventually, like a crock pot, man. It's great, it's awesome. So the first thing out of Dave's mouth was that Jesus doesn't have to show up. He has the power to do it from far. Jesus transcends geography. He's omnipresent. Right. Tracking? This is one of the parts of the identity. There's other things in there. That's one of them. Tracking? Okay, go back and do it. Go. What's that?
Right here, there you go. Yeah, right. Right. Yeah. So we never. I think that's the question. I don't think so. Those more that you know, see her. So like first, but sure, but and for a reason, for this man had faith before he got there. So I know you're the one. And he just says you just need signs, I guess. Or however that's pointed, is there. But to go, I always but it's no, come with it. So like, no, okay. Even those. So it had nothing to do with this. Interesting. Before he got us like, hey, you're lucky. You're so yeah, because he asked this happen. And I think he was also going beyond Hey, you got 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute. Yeah.
This table's got all.
Because that's what he's done. Here, what I want is.
I missed my turn. I came up and like turned on. I turned on the media and you're supposed to have a well princess. So then I had to turn all the way around. All the information was like, I'm lost. Well,
You're stressed
right now.
You're stressed about. I don't get it like.
6:59, bro. I walked in the door. All right, let's gather back up. Let's gather back up. Listen, I asked myself this question over the last week or so, and you know, every time I read the scripture in general, but certainly the book of John, something different pops to me, right? We talked about this last week. John records 7 signs. He doesn't want us to park at the sign. He wants the sign to point us to something ultimately. And so, and I heard a couple of things, like I've been thinking about this now. I heard a couple things that were said just now that I did not think about, that did not cross my mind, that were right on the money, 100% right on the money. So here's what I would like to do. I would like us to share out loud for everybody here what you heard someone else say that you thought was really great. Please don't say, well, I said. I would like you to share what you heard. You know what's funny is like you laugh harder at that joke than any other joke. You know why? It's funny because it's true. That's right. That's exactly what it is, Scott. Yeah. So I would. Yeah. Yeah. Enough of me talking about me, but why don't you talk about me? So what did you hear because I heard people say a couple of things I thought were very, very good. What did you hear someone else say in terms of what this sign points to? Heard Dave say that Jesus does not need to be proxies. He transcends geography, right? What else? What else did you hear?
I think Howard shared, he's a promise keeper.
100%. Scott said the same thing. That did not cross my mind. Jesus says, go and your son will be healed, and immediately. God is a promise keeper. See, the sign points us to the character. Are we tracking now? Okay, what else did we hear? Somebody else had to have said something halfway deep. Yeah, John, say that louder. A couple other people said it. That God is a God of compassion. Who said it? Who said it back? Who said it back here? Yeah, that everything that Jesus does is to demonstrate that he's a God of love and compassion and care and concern. Here's the other thing that's going on here. Who is serving whom here? Who's serving whom? Jesus is serving this man. For the Son of Man did not come to what? He served, but to serve, and give his life as a ransom for many. And every other God, he said, every other God in all of human history is there to be served. We serve them, we serve them, we serve. Throw virgins in volcanoes, we sacrifice our time, money, and energy, or whatever. And the incarnate God of the universe says, I'm here to serve you. Whoa. That's wild. That's wild. At the heart of God and the character of God, absolutely. Okay, follow-up question. How often do you let God serve you? Well, I serve God. Yeah, but he declared that his purpose is to come and serve. So will you let the Son of Man serve you? Let that one percolate for a bit. Okay, what else? What other things did this sign point to? Who is this man? Who is this man? No, the man that he serves. Oh. He's an official. Who's he work for? Herod. Good guy or bad guy? Bad guy. Not good. Not a great guy. Yeah, not a great guy. Likely a Gentile. Okay. What else does it tell us about the character of God then?
He transcends the position of the people against him.
Transcends
I didn't say that right. You got this official. And
Can everybody hear Dave?
He has this official, he looks down on Jesus. I'm assuming that's the position in the community at that time, but Jesus transcends that. The guy's need is so bad that he goes to Jesus and Jesus heals him without even being touched.
Yeah. Now, 2 chapters ago,
That's cool.
he's having a conversation in John chapter 3 with a religious leader Nicodemus, right? And one would assume that the type of people that Jesus is gonna have compassion on, whatever, are gonna be people of his own ilk, right? His own faith background. This person is a Gentile. This person works for the man who's oppressing Jesus' race, and yet he still transcends all of those divisions. Isn't that wild?
First to the Jews, then to the synagogues.
Come on, Howard, you don't have to remind us every time.
The key to this is that the public official, as we're called to do, believed in him. And that was the reason for all these signs, so he believed that he was the Christ who can do things, heal his son, save you from your sin. He believed him, no matter what his background, no matter who he was, he believed, and that's what this is saying.
Totally.
Why did he?
Yeah,
Because he had no other choice, his son was dying. See, when you need, the only time you need Jesus is when you have nothing else.
That's right.
He had nothing else. That's how it brought this guy to believe, and he performed. His faith was not disappointing. So we talked about promise. He believed, the result.
Which I totally agree with, that this man, and one of the things that John brings to the surface is that he believes in Jesus. What most theologians would say is that, in terms of the parables that Jesus teaches, we talked about this a couple weeks ago, but the parables Jesus teaches, the signs that he performs, ultimately they're Christological in nature. Jesus is teaching us something about himself. So, yes, that man believed, and yes, as a result, and this happens other places in the scripture, right? 4 men lowered their friend down who's paralyzed, right? And Jesus saw what? Their faith, that they believed, right? So I don't disagree with that. What Jesus is, what John is saying here is, what else does this tell us about the character of God? Let's do 2 or 3 more.
Like Romans 5, 8, and 10 says, others fell sinners against him, all their enemies. He proactively came to die.
Yeah, love it. It's interesting. I like that a lot because Jesus leaves Samaria and he goes to Galilee. Why? Doesn't tell us. The only thing we can assume is that he had something to do there. He had ministry to do there. The reason why he passed through Samaria, if you recall in John chapter 4, it said that Jesus had to pass through Samaria. He didn't have to. Most Jews would have crossed the Jordan River, went east across the Jordan River, up north, around Samaria, and back to Galilee in the north. That's what they would have typically done. Jesus did not have to pass through Samaria. He had other options. He did not have to go to Galilee. He had other options. What that tells us, and I love what you're saying here, is that he is a proactive God. He's a seeking God. He's a God who condescends and becomes flesh and dwells among us. Hey, listen, if we're going to model our lives, this is the definition of discipleship, by the way, someone who's systematically reorganizing their life to reflect the character and priority of Jesus, that when we have conflict with our spouse, we should be the seeker. The proactive seeker. Because that's what we see Jesus doing here in this passage. Points to the character of God. 2 more.
He is no respecter of persons.
I love it. Say it again, say it louder.
He's no respecter of persons.
He's no respecter of persons. I mean, think of what he's done so far in the text, right? Like John the Baptist has turned over his disciples to Jesus. He's kooky, wild-eyed, crazy-haired, prophet, right out in the middle of nowhere. Then Jesus turns water into wine at a wedding. Then he overturns the religious leaders and the money changers in the temple. Then he hits Nicodemus, who's a religious leader, between the eyes. Then he has a conversation with this immoral, bastardized, really, that's what the Jews would have thought of Samaritans, if they were bastard traitors person. Then this Basilicos comes along and he's like, go and your son will be healed, right? And Nicodemus, we talked about Nicodemus, a very rich man too, very influential man. And the next conversation in the passage is with a poor woman of no. Nicodemus was a Jew, she was a Samaritan. He was moral, she was immoral. And now he gets to this Basilikos and works for Herod Antipas, and he just treats him with compassion, grace, and kindness. And as a result, this man believes. One more.
He is here for the human race, not different.
Love.
layers. When the first thing that he started his ministry is the Samaritan woman, that proves that he's not just here for the Jew or the accepted. He's here he's here for the sinner, and there's no different level of sinner. There's no marginalized sinner. Every single person, the billionaire to the person that's crossing our borders in Mexico, is a sinner. They all need and are all looked at by God the same. So for us to divide up people by the race or their culture or whatever, the solution is the same. God saves you from your sin. We need to start treating you.
I love the statement, he's here for the human race. We talked about that a minute ago, is that he all those gaps that he bridges, right, in John chapter 4. Last one.
Hey, Lucas, he didn't have to go through Samaria. And we've seen throughout his ministry, he disappeared, show up somewhere else.
Right,
He didn't have to go through anywhere. He could have just shown up at his destination.
right.
So that shows us, I think, that, that's a divine appointment. It was his purpose to meet her. It wasn't a happenstance.
Right. So the word that John uses because he actually said Jesus had to go through Samaria, it's the same word that he uses throughout his gospel for a providential calling, not this is the only way. It's like, I'm going to San Diego, so I have to get on a plane. It's like, well, you could drive. You have other options. But like, in this case, it was not about my travel options are limited. This is the only road. This is Jesus feeling compelled and on mission. Hey, I hope you took some of those notes down, because before you leave, you have to answer 3 questions, at least one of 3 questions. You can answer 2, or if you want extra credit, all 3, or if you need it, answer all 3. So what does this teach about God? I hope you listen, because God is compassionate, that he transcends race, that he transcends geography, that this is a God who has become flesh in order to serve. This is a God who, gosh, what else do we say?
Faithful.
Yeah, who's a promise keeper. Thanks, John. Yeah, love it. What does it teach you about God? Number 2, what does it teach you about yourself? Or even what Jesus is calling you to do? Go and what, right? Where is he calling you to go? And then finally, what does he want you to change about what you think, feel, or do? Okay, we'll do 3 minutes of just Q&A in terms of, and remember, this is question time. We did some statement time a little bit, question time. If there's things you want me to clarify in the passage, questions that you have about how it interacts with the rest of the book of John, and then we'll wrap up just with a moment of quick reflection and even discussion if you want to, surrounding those 3 questions.
What does it teach us about God?
What does it teach you about God? What does it teach you about yourself? And what is God calling you to change about what you think, feel, or do?
Can answer the first 2.
Good.
I think a lot of time when we feel that we fall away from God, maybe we're not studying, maybe we're not going to church, whatever. I'm like the official, but all of a sudden we have a need, we go to God, just like the official did. It's a need is greater. And it teaches us about God, that God never leaves. He's always there.
I love that.
He's always there.
I love that.
No matter what we do, he is there. And so about ourselves, we need to go to God more often, even when we don't have those serious needs.
I love that, Dave. Thanks for sharing that. You guys ever commit a sin and you do something wrong, or you fail to do something you know you should do, and instead of going to God immediately in prayer, you're like, I'm gonna give it a few days. Yeah, fix it. It's like, and depending on how bad the sin is, that determines how long you have to wait to talk about it again. You know what I mean? And like, this guy is working for Herod Antipas, and he shows up to Jesus and he says, I have a need. And Jesus goes, I got you. I got you. You know, the Bible says that God rises off his throne to show compassion. That compassion moves God to action. That's the type of God that we love and serve. Questions? Well, go ahead, Howard.
Just a comment, as Abraham trusted in God that God could bring Isaac back from the dead, this man had no question that Jesus could bring his son back if dead.
Yeah.
So there was no question.
Yeah.
And this is where we need to be.
Mm-hmm.
There is no question that God is who he says he
Yeah,
is, and he can do
Yeah.
what he says he can do.
I love it. You have a question?
I just have a comment that he started by saying he's going back to his own country where, he's not honored. And, that then, you said that he looked at him as a magician doing tricks. And so he did the sign that he wanted to do, but they didn't get to see it. He wasn't gonna feed them while he was doing the miracle that probably brought him there in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting.
And those people around him didn't see the miracle. They heard it from the Father.
Yeah, somebody said that a minute ago that he did it in private, right? Which is it was a very interesting notion that this was not, a spectacle was not made.
I meant that the people around the Father believed without seeing the miracle.
The household, you mean? Yeah, I mean, I think that, if the son is in the household, they would have seen that. Right, because he's part of the household.
The men that went to him to say his son was okay.
The servants, they're part of his household too. They would have been part of his household too.
A lot of this we really learn in retrospect. As we leave here, I do in the mornings, I leave here and I go home and put on some coffee or whatever it is. And I start reviewing, and all of a sudden, a lot of this comes back. And I mean, I'm a slow learner, if a learner at all. At the point, as we reflect on what we've heard and what we've seen, and what we haven't seen or heard, is when we have, and in my opinion, the greatest amount of my learning is in retrospect, not at the moment.
Yeah, hindsight's 20/20. So let me encourage you with one thing, and then I would like you to, guys, again, Bible knowledge isn't gonna get us anywhere, really. Jesus knowledge is gonna get us somewhere, especially heart knowledge, right? And the Bible is the door toward that. It's God's self-disclosure and God's gift to us. But we talked about it last week. I mean, I had a professor in college that knew the Bible better than any of us would ever dream to. And he was an atheist, right? It's because it doesn't mean just because you say, Jesus, I believe, hang tight, please. Jesus, I believe, doesn't mean you actually take action and go and your son will live. So that's how we're going to wrap with the last 5 minutes today, is I'm going to encourage you to answer those questions for yourselves. I would also encourage you to have some conversation at the table. I had coffee with Cole this morning and just was able to share with him some things I'm going through personally, and to have a friend listen and ask me questions and provide feedback was super, super helpful, super, super edifying. So if you want to take advantage of the other men in the room who will listen and provide feedback and act as a sounding board, I would encourage you to do that. But again, remember, it's 3 questions. What does it teach about God? What does it teach you about yourself? And what is God calling you to change about what you think, feel, or do? We'll pray and we'll be done. Thanks for the time together. Thanks for your grace to us today. For all the ways in which what John has recorded here for history, posterity, thanks for what it teaches us about you, that you are compassionate, that you came for the human race, that you are no respecter for persons, that you don't have to be near physically necessarily to perform a miracle, that you bring dead things to life. So many things. You're a promise keeper. These are good things. We are so grateful. God, I ask that we would be transformed today by what we've heard. It changes maybe just a little bit our perspective of you, our perspective of ourselves, how we think, feel, or act. In Jesus' name. Amen. All right, guys. Hey, real quick. I'm on family vacation next week in Nashville, so I'm joining via Zoom. Okay, I'll be here teaching, but I'll join via Zoom. Scott just had a really interesting look on his face, which is fine. you do you, boo-boo, I'm gonna do me. And so I love teach by Zoom, which is great. I'll be on Central Standard Time, so it'll be 9 a.m. For me. So that's a little bit of a gift too, but I will see you next week just via Zoom, okay? Everybody here next week? Okay, and invite somebody, bring a friend, okay? Have a great day, fellas.